Lucy Hargreaves was an ordinary woman living an ordinary life, until one brutal night exposed the dark, hidden world of Liverpool's gangland secrets, a world willing to burn everything to keep the truth buried. The rain had begun just after midnight, soft at first, then heavy enough to drown out the usual city noise. On Harrowfield Road, most homes were dark, and the street was quiet except for the distant rumble of thunder. Inside a small terraced house near the end of the row, Lucy Hargreaves had finally managed to fall asleep after a long day. She had spent the evening sorting through old boxes and putting away toys her daughter had left scattered around the living room. Nothing about the night felt unusual, and nothing gave the slightest hint that danger was already moving toward her home. In the shadows beyond the streetlights, a figure dressed head to toe in dark clothing stood still, watching the house with a cold sense of purpose. The person moved with calm certainty, as if every second of the plan had been rehearsed long before this night. A quiet engine cut through the rain for only a moment as a second figure stepped out of a parked van and joined the first. No words were exchanged. Each step they took was deliberate and controlled, avoiding puddles that might draw attention. The calmness of their movements made the moment even more chilling. Just minutes later, the back door of Lucy's home was pushed open with barely a sound. Whoever entered knew exactly where to go. The living room lights were off, but the glow of the street lamp outside cast a faint outline across the furniture. Lucy, asleep on the sofa, never woke to see the danger standing only a few feet away. A single flash erupted in the darkness, followed by a muffled thud that was swallowed by the storm outside. The attack took only seconds. It was efficient, emotionless, and shockingly brutal. The intruders did not leave immediately. Instead, they began moving through the house with an unnerving familiarity, placing small containers of accelerant on the floor and near the curtains. Each movement was carried out with calm precision. The plan went beyond killing. It focused on destruction, eliminating anything that might lead back to them. When the first flames curled up the fabric of the living room curtains, the figure closest to the door stepped back without hesitation. Fire spread quickly, climbing the walls and swallowing the furniture in seconds. The heat intensified with frightening speed, glowing orange through the windows and sending thick smoke into the hallway. Outside, the van's engine started again, blending into the storm as the figures disappeared into the night. Within minutes, neighbors noticed the flames bursting out of Lucy's windows. They rushed out with panic, shouting for help as the fire roared higher. Firefighters arrived as fast as they could, battling their way through the smoke-filled rooms. When the blaze was finally under control, the heartbreaking truth became clear. Lucy had never made it to the door. The fire had not been the reason she died. The darkness before the flames had already taken her life. The entire street stood in silence as emergency crews worked, unable to understand what had happened or why someone so quiet and gentle had been targeted. The fire had done exactly what it was meant to do: hide the true horror of the night and scatter any traces left behind. Nothing about the scene suggested chaos or impulse. Everything pointed to one chilling reality. Someone had planned this attack carefully, and Lucy was never meant to survive. In the days that followed, investigators struggled to understand why Lucy had been targeted with such calculated violence. She lived a quiet, almost invisible life, spending most of her time caring for her young daughter and keeping her household running smoothly. Friends described her as gentle and private, someone who avoided conflict and preferred peaceful routines. Nothing in her recent history suggested she had crossed paths with dangerous people or become involved in anything risky. But detectives knew that the level of precision used in her killing was not the work of ordinary criminals. It hinted at an older story, one that did not begin with Lucy herself. As they spoke to family and neighbors, a hidden detail slowly surfaced. Lucy's partner, Ryan McGrath, had been connected years earlier to a local gang known as the Ridgeway Crew. At its peak, the group dominated several parts of Liverpool, through drug networks, violent protection schemes, and turf wars that often turned deadly. Even though Ryan had distanced himself from that world before his daughter was born, the shadows from his past still lingered around him. The gang wasn't as active as it once had been, but fragments of its influence remained scattered across the city. Detectives began to wonder if someone from that old underworld still held resentment, waiting for a moment to strike. The possibility that Lucy was not the intended target at all troubled investigators. She had never been involved with the Ridgeway crew and had no connection to crime, yet her home was attacked with brutal deliberation. It raised the disturbing thought that she might have been seen as a way to hurt Ryan without confronting him directly. An act of revenge carried out against someone helpless and innocent would send a stronger, more personal message. It was a tactic often used in old gang disputes, an attack designed not only to cause pain, but to carry a warning that no one connected to the past was ever truly free from it. When detectives questioned Ryan, he appeared devastated and confused, insisting he had left that darkness behind years ago. He gave names of people he once knew, men who had threatened him in the past, but many of them were either imprisoned, dead, or had vanished from the city entirely. Yet one detail stood out. A former enforcer linked to a violent Ridgeway feud had been released from prison just weeks before Lucy's death. The timing was eerily close, almost too close to ignore. The man had a history of carrying out orders without hesitation and had been involved in conflicts that left several rivals injured or missing. Even if Ryan was no longer on anyone's list, the enforcer might still believe old scores were unsettled. As detectives pieced together these fragments, they realized Lucy's life had been touched by a world she never wanted or understood. Her murder didn't fit the pattern of a spontaneous attack or a domestic dispute. It was the kind of targeted act seen only in long-running gang tensions, where grudges could sleep for years before erupting again. The thought grew heavier as the investigation deepened. Lucy might have been caught in the crossfire of a past she had no part in creating. Someone had chosen her home, her routine, and the night of the storm carefully, using her as the final step in a plan that had begun long before she ever knew a threat existed. The Ridgeway crew had once been a powerful and feared presence in Liverpool's criminal world, but by the time Lucy was killed, most people believed the gang had faded away. Its members had scattered, drifted into new groups, or disappeared into quiet lives that hid their violent past. Yet to detectives, the shadows left behind by the crew felt unsettlingly alive. Rumors still floated through certain neighborhoods, whispered in pubs, alleyways, and abandoned warehouses where old loyalties were kept alive behind closed doors. Though the gang wasn't openly active anymore, investigators understood that a criminal network like the Ridgeway crew never truly dissolved. It simply sank deeper underground. As detectives dug into the gang's past, they found a trail of violence and fear that had shaped several parts of Liverpool for more than a decade. The Ridgeway crew had been notorious for explosive gang wars with rival groups, including one particularly brutal feud that left multiple people severely injured and 2 suspected members missing. Many of those cases remained unsolved, buried under silence and intimidation. Several officers who had investigated the crew back then described the gang as unpredictable and ruthless, willing to punish not only their enemies, but anyone they suspected of betrayal. It was a world where a mistake was never forgotten, and revenge could wait years before resurfacing. One name kept appearing in the old files, a man known for his cold discipline and loyalty to the gang's leaders. He had been an enforcer, someone called upon when the crew needed tasks completed quietly and efficiently. Years earlier, he had been arrested during a botched armed robbery that investigators believed was connected to an internal power struggle within the Ridgeway crew. The arrest had taken him away from the streets for nearly a decade. Now, just weeks before Lucy's murder, he had been released from prison. The timing felt too precise to be ignored. Police searched for him, hoping he could explain whether he had been approached by old associates or pressured into returning to the criminal world. But the more they looked, the more they realized how little remained of his old life. His former addresses were empty, his contacts unreachable, and no one admitted to knowing his whereabouts. It was as if he had stepped out of prison and vanished into thin air. Some officers believed he had been ordered to remain hidden, carrying out tasks silently for someone still pulling the strings. Others believed he had become a loose end, removed before he could expose what was left of the crew's operations. The more investigators learned, the clearer the picture became. Lucy's murder was not a random act, but part of a quiet, ongoing battle within Liverpool's disappearing criminal underworld. Beneath the surface of quiet neighborhoods and everyday life, the remnants of the Ridgeway crew still operated in shadows, connected by past loyalties and unfinished vendettas. The gang's silence over the years had not meant peace. It had only meant waiting. Detectives began to fear that Lucy's death was just one piece of a much larger story, one filled with old grudges, buried secrets, and a network of former gang members who moved carefully enough to stay undetected. Her connection to Ryan placed her in the center of a conflict she never saw coming. And as the investigation deepened, it became painfully clear that someone from that fading gang world had returned with a purpose determined to settle unresolved scores, no matter who got caught in the crossfire. The search for the recently released enforcer intensified as detectives pushed deeper into the maze of old gang connections, but every path they followed seemed to collapse into silence. His name was familiar to anyone who remembered the darker days of the Ridgeway crew, yet it appeared that no one had seen him since the week he left prison. Officers visited every address he had lived at before his arrest, but the flats were either abandoned, occupied by new tenants, or stripped bare of anything personal. It looked as if someone had wiped away his presence long before investigators arrived. Even the people who once associated with him avoided eye contact and insisted they knew nothing. Their fear was visible, as if speaking his name could pull danger back into their lives. Detectives managed to trace him to a small apartment he had rented under a different name. It was located in a run-down building on the edge of Everton, a place where few questions were ever asked. When officers entered, the scene was unsettling. The electricity had been shut off, despite being paid for the entire month. A plate of food sat untouched on the table, now cold and dried out. A half-filled kettle remained on the counter, suggesting whoever lived there had left suddenly without finishing something as simple as making tea. Nothing was packed or moved. The wardrobe still held clothes. The bathroom held his toothbrush and razor. It looked less like someone who had run away and more like someone who had been pulled from the room without warning. A neighbor on the third floor told detectives about a black van she had seen parked outside for 2 consecutive nights before the man vanished. The windows were tinted, and the vehicle's engine never turned off completely. She described a faint hum that continued for hours, making her uneasy enough to watch from behind her curtain. She had noticed 2 individuals wearing hooded jackets step into the apartment building late one evening, though she couldn't see their faces. The next morning, the van was gone, and the apartment remained silent. No doors opened. No footsteps echoed through the hallway. It was as if the man inside disappeared along with the mysterious visitors. Investigators feared the worst. Gang structures often depended on secrecy, and anyone who might expose lingering operations, past crimes, or hidden leaders could easily become a liability. If someone had ordered Lucy's murder, they might have also removed the enforcer to prevent information from leaking. The van sighting added to the suspicion that more than one person had been involved. Whoever coordinated these movements was organized, disciplined, and capable of erasing people without leaving behind even a single solid lead. Detectives examined CCTV from nearby streets, but the heavy rainfall during those nights blurred most footage. The few vehicles captured on camera were too distorted to identify. It was a frustrating dead end that pushed investigators to consider the possibility that the enforcer had not vanished voluntarily. Someone with enough power and resources had likely orchestrated his removal, ensuring the trail to Lucy's murder grew colder by the day. The deeper the police dug, the more the case shifted from a targeted attack to something far more complex. It was no longer just about Lucy or her connection to Ryan. It began to look like part of a broader chain of events, one carefully managed by individuals who understood how to operate in total darkness. The missing enforcer became a ghostly reminder that the true masterminds were still out there, hiding behind layers of silence, always one step ahead of the investigation. 6 months into the investigation, progress was painfully slow. Detectives continued to sift through burnt remains from Lucy's home, hoping that something had survived the flames. Most of the house had collapsed into charred rubble, but the crime scene team refused to give up. They worked methodically, examining every blackened corner with the hope that even the smallest fragment might reveal a new direction. It was during one of these late examinations that a forensic technician discovered a small, twisted piece of metal buried deep beneath collapsed flooring. At first glance, it looked too damaged to matter, but once cleaned and tested, revealed something unexpected, a part of a firearm that should not have been there. Fragment was traced back to a particular series of shootings connected to the Ridgeway crew violent internal conflict years earlier. Those incidents involved members fighting for control, leadership, and survival. Several victims had been attacked with the same type of weapon, and in all those cases, suspects had vanished before charges could be made. The gun connected to those crimes was never recovered, and the investigations eventually stalled. Now, a piece of that missing weapon had appeared inside Lucy's burnt home. It was a discovery that immediately shifted the direction of the inquiry. It suggested that someone involved in old gang operations had carried out the murder, or, at the very least, supplied the weapon used that night. This clue raised uncomfortable questions. If the murder was tied to those past shootings, then the motive might not be simple revenge against Ryan. Instead, it could be part of a deliberate attempt to hide secrets about the gang's internal war secrets that had remained buried for years. Detectives began examining the old case files again, piecing together timelines, names, and alliances. The Ridgeway crew's violent history was filled with betrayals that had destroyed friendships and divided loyalties. Some members may have feared that their actions, once forgotten, were now in danger of resurfacing. Eliminating Lucy might have been a way to silence someone they believed knew more than she actually did. A disturbing pattern emerged. Several individuals connected to those old shootings had recently reappeared in the city after long absences. A former lookout had returned from living abroad. A previous gang member known for supplying weapons had been spotted in a neighborhood where he once operated. Police also discovered that a warehouse previously used by the crew had been broken into 3 weeks before Lucy's death, though nothing valuable seemed to be taken. The timing was suspicious, as if someone was searching for something hidden long ago. Detectives started to believe the motive behind Lucy's murder was part of a much larger plan, a plan involving people who wanted to erase any trace of their role in the gang's violent past. Someone may have feared that Lucy or Ryan possessed information that could expose them. Even if that belief was wrong, the attackers clearly acted with the conviction that eliminating Lucy would protect their secrets. The evidence began to point toward an orchestrated effort rather than a spontaneous act. The disappearance of the enforcer, the black van, the firearm fragment, and the sudden movement of former gang members all seemed interconnected. It painted a picture of a group of individuals who were quietly tying up loose ends from a forgotten era of violence. Lucy had become one of those loose ends, not because of who she was, but because of who she was connected to. Her death echoed a chilling truth. Some crimes never fade, and the people involved never stop protecting their past. The deeper detectives explored, the more they realized that Lucy's murder wasn't just about revenge or intimidation. It was about control over a story that certain individuals wanted buried forever. even if it meant destroying innocent lives to keep it hidden. Despite the long months of investigation, interviews, forensic tests, and endless nights spent reviewing cold files, detectives reached a point where the case felt trapped in a loop. Every lead that once looked promising eventually dissolved into nothing, leaving behind more questions than answers. Lucy's murder had become a haunting presence within the department, a case that refused to unfold no matter how hard they pushed. The deeper they looked, the clearer it became that someone had worked tirelessly to keep the truth out of reach. It was not just one person hiding in the shadows. It was a structure, a system built to silence anything that threatened old wounds within Liverpool's criminal underworld. Detectives believed the missing enforcer held the key to unlocking the mystery, but without him, there was no clear link. Searches across the city continued, and officers quietly contacted colleagues in Manchester, Birmingham, and Glasgow, suspecting he might have fled or been moved elsewhere. Not a single report placed him anywhere. His bank accounts were untouched, his medical records showed no activity, and no family member had heard from him. Eventually, investigators accepted a grim possibility. The man had likely been removed permanently, eliminated by the very people he once served. If he had been involved in Lucy's murder, even as a reluctant participant, those who orchestrated the attack would never allow him to speak. The black van remained another chilling reminder of a vanished trail. With no registration captured on CCTV, no witnesses who could identify its occupants, and no similar vehicles found abandoned or burned, it simply disappeared into the city's endless traffic. Detectives considered whether it had been brought in from outside Liverpool, specifically for the job, and immediately taken apart or hidden in a remote location. Whoever planned the operation had ensured the van left no trace behind. It was a sign of careful planning that went far beyond the actions of impulsive criminals. As weeks turned into months, the case gradually shifted from an active pursuit to a heavy chapter stored within the shelves of unsolved tragedies. Nonetheless, detectives refused to let it fade completely. They revisited the scene, rechecked witness statements, and monitored former Ridgeway crew members, hoping someone would slip or reveal something unintentionally. But nothing came. Those connected to the old gang lived their lives quietly, avoiding attention, blending into everyday routines while carrying their past like an invisible weight. It was impossible to know who among them had played a role in Lucy's death or who continued to protect those responsible. Over time, the community surrounding Harrowfield Road tried to return to normal. New residents moved into the renovated house, unaware of the horror that once unfolded there. Neighbors who witnessed the fire still remembered the night clearly, though many preferred not to speak about it. They had seen enough to understand that the attack had not been random. It was a message aimed at someone who had escaped their past, but whose loved one had paid the price. Lucy's family continued to seek answers, hoping someone would come forward. But fear was powerful, especially when it came to old gang matters. The people who might have known the truth were either gone, silenced, or unwilling to risk becoming the next target in a conflict that began long before Lucy ever entered the picture. In the end, her murder became one of Liverpool's most disturbing unsolved gangland cases. It exposed how easily the remnants of old criminal networks could reach into the present and how past violence could erupt without warning, striking at those who had no involvement in its history. Lucy's story became a reminder that unresolved grudges, buried secrets, and hidden power struggles never truly disappear. They linger beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to return. Her case remains open, resting in the hands of investigators who still hope that one day a missing piece will finally appear. But until that moment comes, the brutal murder of Lucy Hargreaves stands as a chilling symbol of a truth no one wants to admit, that some crimes are kept unsolved not by accident, but by design.